Think about what just happened, not the headline you saw this morning, not the official statements from Washington or Tel Aviv. I mean what actually happened, the move beneath the move. It's 4 a.m. in southern Lebanon. Day 256 of whatever we're supposed to call this slow-burn regional war that nobody wants to officially name. And a single Hezbollah drone, not much bigger than the one your neighbor flies over the park on weekends, crosses the border into northern Israel. Now you probably saw this already. Drone incursion, Iron Dome, maybe a few interceptors fired, barely a blip on the news cycle, right? Except that drone wasn't the story. It was never the story. The drone was a receipt, and there's one detail buried in paragraph 47 of an open-source intelligence report almost nobody read this week. One detail that changes everything about why Iran just exposed a performance the U.S. and Israel have been running for 8 months straight. I'll show it to you later. But first, let's pull this apart together. Because what Iran just pulled off in Lebanon isn't just about Hezbollah. It's about revealing something much bigger, something most analysts missed completely. And the way they did it, using Lebanon as a stage, not a battlefield, is honestly the smartest move Tehran has made since October 7th. You see the pattern here? Signal 1. 2 weeks ago, U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein lands in Beirut. His mission officially, de-escalation. Calm things down on the blue line. Prevent northern Israel from turning into what southern Israel became on October 7th. The press covers the diplomatic theater. Handshakes. Joint statements. Productive discussions. You know the routine. But behind the scenes, and this is where the signal ladder starts, something strange happens. Hezbollah doesn't just reject the proposal. They don't even engage with it seriously, not even a counteroffer. Now that sounds small. Hold on to that detail. It comes back. Because a refusal to negotiate usually means one of two things. Either you're too weak to negotiate, so you stall, or you're strong enough that you don't need to. And Hezbollah, in that moment, was broadcasting which one it was. They weren't stalling. They were waiting. Signal 2. Bigger now. Harder to ignore. Less than 72 hours after Hochstein leaves Beirut empty-handed, Hezbollah releases a 9-minute drone reconnaissance video, not a clip. 9 full minutes, uninterrupted, filmed over northern Israel. And here's what you need to understand. This isn't just footage of some fields and roads. This is the port of Haifa, the Rafael Advanced Weapons Facilities, Iron Dome batteries, military infrastructure that Israel spent years layering with air defense specifically to prevent anyone from getting this exact footage. All of it captured by a single drone that flew for nearly 10 minutes over some of the most sensitive military sites in the country and went home. No interception, no jamming, no Iron Dome activation. Now, sit with that for a second. Israel's entire northern air defense architecture was designed to stop exactly this. And a drone, not a stealth bomber, not a hypersonic missile, a drone, flew where it wanted, filmed what it wanted, and returned to base with a 9-minute souvenir that Hezbollah then posted like a tourism video. Wait, read that again. 9 minutes. Over Haifa, over Rafael, over Iron Dome batteries, and nobody could stop it. You know what this actually means? It means the deterrent that was supposed to keep northern Israel safe isn't just leaky. It's not working at all in the face of the one threat everyone knew was coming. This is the detail the big networks treated as a footnote. Hezbollah releases drone footage. No. Hezbollah just proved Israel's northern defense is a screen door, and they did it without firing a single shot. Signal 3. This one mattered most, and it came from a place nobody was watching. While the world was looking at the drone footage, at Haifa, at the military installations, something else was happening. Iranian state media, which is normally careful about how it frames Hezbollah's actions, did something unusual. They didn't call it a Hezbollah operation. They called it, and I'm quoting the translation here, the opening of the Northern Front's surveillance phase. Those 6 words. Opening of the Northern Front's surveillance phase. That's not reporting. That's announcing. That's Tehran saying, through its own media, in its own language, on its own terms, that what just happened in northern Israel isn't Hezbollah acting independently. It's an Iranian-directed operation that just entered a new phase, and they're telling you the phase name. When you put all three signals together, the diplomatic rejection, the 9-minute drone flight, Tehran claiming the operation as its own, there's only one conclusion. Iran just used Lebanon to expose something, and what they exposed isn't just Israeli vulnerability, it's something much more uncomfortable. Officially, here's what happened. A drone flew over Israel. Israel's air defense didn't intercept it. Embarrassing, sure. A violation, yes. But that's the public version. That's how the press reported it. The problem with that version, the thing nobody in the briefings will say out loud, is that this wasn't a failure of Israeli air defense. Think about this with me. Israel has spent 15 years and billions of dollars building the most layered, most sophisticated air defense network on the planet. Iron Dome handles the short-range stuff. David's Sling covers the medium range. Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 are designed to stop ballistic missiles in space. And underneath all of that, you've got electronic warfare systems, jamming capabilities, radar networks that can track a bird over Tel Aviv. A drone flying at 100 miles per hour isn't invisible to any of that. The radars saw it. They definitely saw it. So why wasn't it shot down? Here's my read on this, and I could be wrong, but the evidence keeps pointing in one direction. This wasn't a failure of technology. This was a failure of doctrine. Israel's systems were designed for rockets, missiles, the kind of threats Hamas represents. They built a shield against speed and trajectory. But what Hezbollah flew was slow and low and quiet, and the system, designed to look for fast and high and loud, effectively treated it as noise. And look, that's my analysis. You draw your own conclusions. But the implication is devastating, because if the most advanced air defense system in the world can be defeated by a tactic this simple, what does that say about every other system that was modeled on Israel's architecture? What does that say about U.S. air defense assumptions across the entire Middle East? This isn't just Israel's problem now. It's everyone's. And this is where the story turns, because the drone flight wasn't the point. The point was the exposure. Iran wanted the world to see the footage. More specifically, Iran wanted Washington to see the footage. Because Washington has been running a performance of its own for 8 months, and Tehran just pulled back the curtain. Here was the U.S.-Israel logic from October onward. Israel's security is absolute. Our deterrence is ironclad. Hezbollah can't meaningfully threaten the north. Iran's proxies are contained. Yes, Gaza is difficult, but the northern front is under control. Any escalation there would be met with overwhelming force, and Hezbollah knows it. And on paper, it should have worked. The U.S. has 2 carrier strike groups in the region. Israel has the most capable air force in the Middle East. Hezbollah's arsenal, while large, has never been tested against this kind of layered defense. The deterrent posture was credible. The math checked out. But then one thing happened that the architects of this strategy never saw coming. Hezbollah, and through them, Iran, stopped playing the game of deterrence. They didn't launch 150,000 rockets. They didn't flood the border with fighters. They didn't do the thing everyone expected, the thing all the planning was designed to counter. They sent one drone, one slow, low, quiet drone, and it flew where it wanted, filmed what it wanted, and went home. And that didn't just kill Plan A. Plan B went down with it, because Plan A was deterrence, the threat of overwhelming retaliation preventing Hezbollah from acting. And Plan B was defense, the layers of technology stopping anything that got through. The drone proved that both plans were based on the same false assumption, that Hezbollah would play the game the way Israel expected them to play it. They didn't. And now the entire strategic architecture in the north looks different. Not because anything changed militarily, because something changed psychologically. The deterrent was revealed as performance. The emperor's clothes, gone. Now let's get into what this actually costs. Not in lives, though that number will come, but in the currency that determines everything else. Israel's air defense infrastructure isn't just expensive to build, it's expensive to maintain, to operate, to keep constantly alert against a threat that might come any minute. Every Iron Dome battery runs roughly $50 million per unit. Each Tamar interceptor missile costs about $50,000. The radar systems, the operators, the command centers, all of it costs money every hour of every day. But here's the cost clock that matters. Since October 7th, northern Israel has been on a state of elevated readiness that's burning through defense budgets at a rate of approximately $18 million a day. Every day. Not a week. Not a month. Every single day. And that drone, the one that flew for 9 minutes, it probably cost about $5,000 to build, maybe less. $5,000 defeated an $18 million a day defense posture. Since you started watching this video, another $200,000 just evaporated into readiness costs that didn't stop a single slow-moving drone. That's not a military problem. That's an economic attrition problem. And Iran knows it, because asymmetric warfare isn't about destroying the enemy's capability. It's about making capability irrelevant, making it too expensive to sustain, making the cost of defense higher than the cost of offense until something breaks. And something is breaking. The real battle isn't on the battlefield right now. It's inside the Israeli security establishment, inside the U.S. administration, inside the coalition that's been holding the Northern Front together through sheer deterrent posture. And that coalition is now fighting itself. On one side, and I need you to understand this clearly, you have the Israeli military leadership, the IDF Chief of Staff, the Northern Command, the Intelligence Directorate. They see the drone footage. They see Haifa. They see what Hezbollah just proved. And their conclusion is not what you might expect. Their conclusion is not, we need to strike Hezbollah immediately. Their conclusion is, we are not ready. The IDF knows something the political leadership doesn't want to admit publicly. 8 months of grinding war in Gaza has depleted munition stockpiles, exhausted personnel, strained readiness to levels that make a full-scale northern campaign extremely difficult. The Air Force is tired. The reservists are tired. The economy is tired. And Hezbollah hasn't fired a single rocket yet, not in any serious way. On the other side, you have the political leadership, Netanyahu's coalition, the settler movement, the voices saying that deterrence must be restored immediately, that any sign of weakness invites attack, that the drone must be answered with overwhelming force. And here's where you'd ask me, who's winning that fight? For now, the military is winning, quietly, through back channels, through CENTCOM coordination, through the Americans who are applying enormous behind-the-scenes pressure to prevent a northern escalation that would make Gaza look like a skirmish. The U.S. doesn't want this war. The IDF leadership doesn't want this war. And that consensus, fragile, unspoken, held together by mutual anxiety, is the only thing preventing a full-scale conflict right now. But that consensus costs something. It costs the appearance of strength. And every time Hezbollah flies a drone through northern Israel, every time they release footage of a military installation that was supposed to be untouchable, the domestic political pressure on Netanyahu increases. Because he can't explain to his own base why the most powerful military in the region just let a drone film its secrets and go home. He can't explain it because he knows the real answer, and the real answer would destroy the deterrent faster than the drone footage did. Here's the internal calculation inside Tehran right now, and I need to walk you through this carefully because it's the key to everything that happens next. Iran has spent decades building Hezbollah into what it is today, a state within a state, an arsenal of 150,000 rockets, many of them precision-guided, a fighting force hardened by years of war in Syria, a political party that controls Lebanon's most important institutions, the crown jewel of Iran's forward defense strategy. And for years, the logic was simple. Hezbollah is Iran's insurance policy. Attack Iran's nuclear program, and Hezbollah opens the northern front. strike Iranian territory, and Hezbollah responds from a border Israel can't ignore. The deterrent worked because the threat was credible and the cost was unacceptable. October 7th changed that calculation in ways nobody expected, not because Hezbollah's capabilities changed, because the perception of those capabilities changed. Hamas's attack showed that non-state actors could breach the most heavily defended border in the Middle East. Suddenly, Hezbollah's threat wasn't theoretical anymore. It was visible, tangible, scarier than it had been 3 days earlier. But Iran faced a dilemma: use Hezbollah immediately, while Israel was reeling, and risk losing the crown jewel in the retaliatory strike that would inevitably follow. Or hold Hezbollah back, preserve the deterrent, and let the psychological impact of the threat do the work while the actual forces stayed safe. Tehran chose option 2. And for 8 months, that choice has been criticized inside the axis of resistance as weakness. Hamas wanted the northern front opened. Palestinian Islamic Jihad wanted the northern front opened. Elements inside Hezbollah itself wanted to join the fight while Israel was distracted. The internal debate inside the Iranian system has been brutal. The IRGC hardliners arguing that hesitation looks like fear. The more cautious factions, and yes, they exist, arguing that Hezbollah is more valuable as a threat than as a tool. The supreme leader, who is 85 years old and thinks in decades, not months, ultimately siding with caution, and that debate was starting to tilt. The hardliners were gaining ground. The criticism was getting louder. We have the most powerful non-state military force on the planet, and we're watching Gaza be destroyed while we do nothing. That was the argument inside the room. So Iran needed a move, something that demonstrated capability without triggering full-scale war, something that restored the credibility of the deterrent without spending the deterrent itself, something that showed strength without crossing the line into escalation. The 9-minute drone flight over Haifa was that move. Not a rocket barrage, not a border infiltration. A single drone. Slow, quiet, almost gentle. And it did more damage to Israeli deterrence than 1,000 rockets would have, because rockets get intercepted and the story becomes Iron Dome works. A drone that flies for 9 minutes over military installations and goes home, that story becomes nothing works. Iran just proved it can hit northern Israel anytime it wants, with something as simple as a hobbyist drone. And if a hobbyist drone can get through, what do you think a cruise missile looks like? What do you think a swarm of 50 of these things looks like? The answer is obvious, and it's meant to be obvious. That's the whole point. Now let's go beyond the headline. Because this is the section where we pull back and look at the 40 chess moves ahead picture, the thing the news cycle can't show you because it moves too fast. Here's the key ambiguous fact. Iran chose to expose this vulnerability now, not 6 months ago, when the exposure might have been strategically justified by some immediate objective, not after some Israeli provocation that demanded a response. Now, in June, almost at random, from the outside. A Tuesday, just another Tuesday. And they released the footage like it was nothing. Why now? Option 1, Iran is preparing for escalation, and this is psychological preparation. Soften the target, demonstrate capability, make the Israeli public nervous. Create conditions where a future strike feels less shocking because the vulnerability has already been revealed. The problem with this read is that Iran has been actively avoiding escalation for 8 months. Everything in their behavior suggests they want the war contained to Gaza. The supreme leader didn't suddenly change his strategic calculus overnight. If escalation was the goal, the drone flight would have been followed by something. It wasn't. It was just a drone flight. And then silence. Option 2. Iran is responding to internal pressure from the axis of resistance. Hezbollah's fighters have been sitting on the border for 8 months watching Gaza burn. The IRGC wants action. The hardliners are ascendant. This is a bone thrown to the hawks, something they can claim as a victory without actually triggering the war nobody wants. This red is closer to reality. The internal dynamics I just described are real. But if this was just about managing internal pressure, there were easier ways to do it. A rocket barrage that gets intercepted. A border skirmish that makes headlines. Why this? Why the drone flight? Why the 9-minute video? Why the specific targeting of Haifa and Raphael and Iron Dome batteries? Option 3, and this is where I land in my read, is that Iran just exposed something far more important than Israeli vulnerability. Iran just exposed the U.S.-Israel performance. For 8 months, the United States has been telling the world that it has Israel's back. Carrier strike groups, intelligence sharing, diplomatic cover, the full weight of American power positioned to prevent regional escalation. And for 8 months, that posture has been the foundation of stability in the region. Everyone, Iran included, calibrated their behavior based on the assumption that U.S. deterrence was real, that American power would actually be used if red lines were crossed. The drone flight tested a different question. Not, will the U.S. respond? But, does the U.S. even know what's happening in real time? And the answer apparently was no. Because if the U.S. had known, if the intelligence sharing was as robust as advertised, if the coordination between CENTCOM and the IDF was as tight as the briefings claimed, that drone would have been intercepted before it crossed the border. It wasn't. 9 full minutes. And the Americans, for all their surveillance, for all their satellites, for all their listening posts, didn't see it coming. Or saw it and couldn't do anything about it. Either explanation is damning. The performance Iran exposed isn't just Israeli, it's American. It's the entire architecture of regional security that the U.S. has been selling to Gulf allies, to European partners, to domestic audiences for decades. We can protect you. We can see the threats. We can stop them. And Iran just proved, with a $5,000 drone and a GoPro camera, that the emperor has no clothes. And that's the detail the big networks treated as a footnote. The drone footage isn't just about Haifa. It's about Riyadh and Abu Dhabi and Doha, all watching this video, all asking themselves the same question. If a drone can fly through northern Israel's airspace for 9 minutes without being stopped, what happens when the Houthis try the same thing over Aramco? What happens when Iraqi militias fly one over the green zone? What happens when the technology that was supposed to protect all of us turns out to be vulnerable to the simplest threat possible? The entire U.S. security guarantee in the Middle East just got a little thinner, and nobody in Washington wants to admit it. Remember that detail I mentioned? The one buried in paragraph 47 of an open-source intelligence report almost nobody read? Here's where it comes in. That report, published by a small OSINT collective that monitors satellite imagery of military installations, documented something strange at Israel's Ramat David Air Base in the week before the drone flight. Satellite imagery showed 3 Iron Dome batteries being relocated from the northern sector to the south. 3 batteries, moved away from the Lebanon border, toward Gaza. The report was technical, dry, easy to skip over. Observed relocation of air defense assets from Sector North to Sector South, consistent with ongoing operational requirements in the Gaza envelope. Nobody covered it. Nobody flagged it as significant. But that relocation happened 4 days before the drone flight, 4 days before Hezbollah sent a slow, low, quiet drone across the border. And the batteries that were moved were stationed in exactly the sector where the drone crossed. Now, stop and sit with that. Iran and Hezbollah didn't just exploit a vulnerability in Israeli air defense. They exploited a vulnerability in Israeli attention. They waited until the system was looking south. They waited until Gaza consumed the resources, the focus, the radar coverage. They waited until the shield shifted, and then they walked right through the gap. That's not opportunism. That's intelligence. That's pattern of life analysis. That's someone watching satellite imagery, monitoring IDF force disposition announcements, tracking the movement of air defense assets in real time, and then acting with surgical precision on the exact day the northern sector was thinnest. The drone flight wasn't luck. It was the product of an intelligence operation that tracked Israeli air defense movements, identified a window of vulnerability, and exploited it with a single cheap drone to generate a propaganda victory that just rewrote the psychological balance of the northern border. And here's the implication nobody is talking about. If Iran and Hezbollah have that level of insight into Israeli air defense movements, if they can see batteries being relocated within days, if they can identify gaps in coverage in real time, then what else do they see? What else do they know about Israeli military disposition that the Israeli public doesn't? The answer is probably everything that matters. Because modern intelligence isn't about stealing secrets from briefcases, it's about watching patterns. And patterns are impossible to hide when you're fighting a war on one front while trying to maintain deterrence on another. This is the macro loop closing. The detail buried in paragraph 47 just told you more about the real balance of power on the northern border than every official statement from the last 8 months combined. And now, before we close, there's an evergreen dimension to all of this, a lesson that will still matter 6 months from now, a year from now, whenever someone watches this video. The lesson is this: deterrence isn't real. It's a story. It's a narrative that both sides agree to believe until one side stops believing it. And the moment one side stops believing it, the moment one side tests the story against reality, the entire thing collapses. Not gradually, instantly. Iran just stopped believing the story. They tested it. They flew a drone through it, and the story crumbled. You see this pattern in every conflict. The Maginot Line, the Iraqi Republican Guard, the Russian Black Sea Fleet, military power that exists more as reputation than reality, more as narrative than capability, and every time the collapse starts the same way. Someone sends something small through the gap, a drone, a special forces team, a single attack that isn't supposed to work until it does. What Iran just did in Lebanon is a masterclass in asymmetric psychological warfare. They didn't need to destroy Israeli air defense. They just needed to prove it doesn't work as advertised. And they did it with a $5,000 drone and 9 minutes of footage that will be studied in military academies for years. So here's the devastating final line. Sit with it. The drone that flew through Israel's northern air defense wasn't the weapon. The footage wasn't the weapon. The weapon was the question it planted in everyone's mind, and a question, once planted, can't be intercepted by Iron Dome. I'm Professor Lena Voss. If you want to see the full 9-minute drone footage and my frame-by-frame breakdown of what Hezbollah was actually targeting, that video goes up Friday. Subscribe so you don't miss it.